everyone, and welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Rachel and Dana. Today we are kicking off our month of discussion on Indigo by Beverly Jenkins, which has been a long-awaited pick. Dana, you picked this one out months ago, and so we've sort of slowly been working our way toward it. So really excited to get into the conversation about this. But first and foremost, what's happening over at Danger Tales, Dana?
Oh my word. Listen, y'all, we talk about this, we pre-record, and it's like when the mic is in your face. So, what is going on? I mean, nothing really in general, like our normal stuff, workshops, all that jazz. One of the things that Rachel and I was talking about in the pre-show, because we do it like a pre-show, that makes us sound nice and fancy and stuff. In our
Other than just we couldn't stop yakking before we hit record.
Girl, speak for yourself. In our pre-show recording, we were talking about how I've been having these aha moments when it comes to my most recent stories that I'm writing, with going from writing what I would classify as like a regular novel length story, and then going into what I call a mega novel. And y'all, there have been huge aha moments that have been absolutely frustrating, exciting. But as someone who is both a writer and an editor, that has been like grossly underestimated so many areas. And so, yeah, that's what's been going on. So going from having normally, I don't know, I would say normally around 75,000-ish words to my last story being around 130. Whew, whew, whew. It was like, now writing it was a lot of fun, but then going back through it and all that. And I was telling Rachel, and now I'm telling y'all, like I was calling upon listen, I'm a very busy woman. Like not no more, no less than most people, but just in general. And I plan out and block out time. I'm always writing, but I block out time when I know I'm transitioning into a book I'm publishing. And so I'm blocking the time out, and in my brain, I'm blocking it out according to the amount of time that I take when I'm working with clients. Like I have clients that are always and notoriously, averaging 130, 140,000 words. And so I know how long it takes me to edit those, get notes back, blah, 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 blah. But man, I felt like I was on the struggle bus with 4 flat tires. It was just like...
Oh, hey, I think I was on that bus. We didn't see each other.
There. So yes, I think, so some of the takeaways, and the reason why I'm sharing it now, I think it's one of those things where, just because you go from, people think sometimes when you go from, well, if I want to do a full length and then I just want to do, a short story or a novella, I'll just cut out the number of words. And it's not always that easy. Just like it's not that easy to go from a novel to going to something that I would be a mega novel. And I think for me, as someone that always looks at structural things, I automatically thought about that, right? Because you need to have things going on the page to ensure that it's not lagging or slacking in the middle, or it's not squishy in the middle. But I didn't think a lot about mental bandwidth, energy and physical bandwidth. Normally, when I am doing stuff editing, I can easily have 4 to 6 drafts of my novels, normally just going into my normal passes and my read-throughs. I like to have, one of my passes is to finish a book in one sitting. To finish 130,000 book in one sitting. So it just was so, y'all hearing Dana the writer. This was just so very interesting, and knowing that that's the direction that I'm taking it to, or going in, meant sitting down and starting to sort of list out what would I do differently, and what caused me to feel that way, versus just being, oh, this is frustrating. Like you tell your kids, use your words. Like, what made it frustrating? What's going on here? And what did I like about it and what didn't I like about it. And I'm sure I'll be processing more over the next coming weeks. But as someone who is actively writing, the next story is going to be starting next week. So it's like, you know what? Suck it up, buttercup, take some notes, plan out, pass offs, handoffs, how do I handle read throughs? Do I need to take down the number of read throughs, or do I need to aim to complete my first drafts faster so that I do have more time on that side? So things like that are what I'm processing as we speak, literally this morning.
Yeah.
And the thing that I'll say about all of it is this is why, and this is why I always tell my students, this is the benefit that you get with me from me being an active writer, not just the fact of knowing what's going on in the marketplace because I have books in the marketplace, but from a writer perspective of like juggling all of this and writing another book live. We're still about to start writing another book live and things like that. And I'm doing that at the same time with writing this romantic suspense in the background, technically in the background. So yeah, so that's what's going on. I don't know if there's no way to wrap that up with a bow other than life's been lifing. Okay. Life's been lifing.
I want to say, I think that's, there's such a great takeaway there, though, that I think that writers don't always, just remember to kind of embrace is that taking time to do that reflection, right, on the experience when you look back. Because I think that's a part of also, refining your process, whether you're trying to refine your existing process or something in your writing is shifting, right? So you've shifted into, this is a bigger novel. So that's a shift in the overall, that's a shift in your writing, right? In this instance. And so whether you're refining your current process or you're making a move into a different genre or longer books or shorter books, because length matters when it comes to delivering your story, and the way you deliver that story will differ based on the length, that length, whether you're short story, novella, or novel. There are significant differences between those, or then, super plus novel. But taking the time to reflect on your process and to reflect on the experience is a huge part of developing your process moving forward and embracing the growth that comes with publishing more books and doing more projects, so that you can be more intentional about engaging your growth. And then it means that in your future projects, you can be more intentional. Again, whether you're just trying to refine your own process or whether you're shifting something in your author, if you're adding another pen name or whatever that change is that you're making. And I think that's really helpful because it's easy to forget to do that because you're kind of just all right, got that thing done. Now I got to move on to the next thing, but giving a little bit of that in between time, even if it's just your off writing time, right? It's not that you're not immediately moving to the next project, but it's giving yourself the time, some of that off writing time to reflect, which is, I think, really helpful.
That, and I would also say, I think it's so important to think about when you're someone that you are learning and you're working with someone else. If you're working with a coach or an editor, a lot of times what's being taught is either a process, whether it's that coach or editor's process that they're teaching, or another process that they've learned and they've passed on. But when you are doing it and implementing it, then you have the opportunity to say, what aspects of this work for me? What doesn't work for me? Where are the areas where I wish I would have spent a little more time? I think for someone who loves plotting, it's easy for me to do that on the prep side and plotting. Mm-hmm. That was there. The other parts, energy, thinking through, how was I going to handle those rounds of edits, things like that. I thought about them, but not the way I should. So spending that time to make those transitions and then beginning to say, these are the things that I should consider when I'm working on a short story. These are the things that I should consider when I'm working on a novel and a mega novel. And I've done that before. I remember one year when I was a part of a collaboration and we released 10 novellas in the same year. And I remember going into that thinking, I really want to have a strong grasp on what it takes to write or to create and create a novella concept, right? Because that's one of the biggest considerations when you are changing the size and scale of a story, right? Of like what sort of concept and what elements do I know I need to create the characters to still keep it within that scope, but still have depth. And so this, I think, was just another one of those corners that I'm turning, or another sort of opportunity to grow as a writer. And then once I'm done, be able to articulate it in such a way that I can help my clients. And so, yeah, I mean, I want to say I love it, but I'm still in the middle of it. But in general, it was all good. And so, yeah, that's what I'm working through now. And the next story, we'll start writing it next week.
Awesome.
What about you, ma'am?
Yeah, so at the time of this recording, I'm wrapping up reading Blood Over Brighthaven, which has been, honestly, it's interesting to read that story while we're discussing Indigo, because Indigo did it better, and it's giving me really a reference point for some of the things that I was like maybe struggling to articulate with Blood Over Brighthaven. And so it's been interesting to experience these two novels kind of right next to each other. But the beginning of the story was really super interesting. And the thing about fantasy, right, is with every fantasy, when you are opening a fantasy that is, especially if it's not, the second or third book in a series, but even then, you're warming the reader into a new world. Fact of the matter is, every fantasy you show up to, you get in there and you're like, what? Right? Because it's a literally whole new world that you're getting into. And so there's all of these techniques that you have to use to warm your reader into that world, and you got to balance getting them into the story, getting them caught up on what they need to know. Like, there's really a lot of stuff that you're juggling. So it gave me the opportunity to reflect. One of my recent newsletters that went out was about the role that dialogue can play in world building. And the gist of it is that, so dialogue is an important tool to use to world build, where one character is explaining something to another character. Very, very common tool, and it's a great tool to have in your toolkit. But there are a few things that you have to keep in mind, because just because you're world building in dialogue does not mean it's not info dumping. And that's the thing that you want to be acutely aware of. So you want to watch out for things like your characters explaining stuff to each other that they should already know. Right? And you get that, as you know, and you're like, well, what the heck are we explaining this to each other for? We know,
Right. Exactly.
But also the rules of good dialogue still apply here, right? So you still want there to be conflict or tension, or, you still need to kind of abide those rules of dialogue where the characters are, mutually navigating a situation, or, there's using whatever world building information as currency, right? Whether you're trying to get leverage over someone or establish trust with someone, all of those rules still apply when you're putting your world building into dialogue. And if you do it that way, what you do is you invest your reader in the information that they're getting, because now it's connected to conflict of some kind, or like, something anchored in the story. You develop your characters and you help them understand the world while also kind of moving your story forward. And those are kind of some things to keep in mind if and when, because again, it's super common to put your world building into dialogue, but you want to still treat it as dialogue, which means that it should still be good dialogue. The story wasn't maybe what I like hoped that it would be, and but it really prompted some fantastic conversations about handling fantasy and world building and kind of how you establish a reader in a world and stuff like that. So overall, it's been a good, it's a good experience.
Are you reading that with a client?
No, I'm just reading that. I'm, always trying to read as many crime and fantasy novels as I can essentially get my hands on, to kind of just round out the repertoire. And if I ever have a client who is writing anything even remotely close to any of these kind of genre or character considerations, but this one was actually just one that was like my personal edification and expansion.
I can't wait till you read that other book to see what you say. The second one in the demigods that I told you about.
Oh yeah.
For that reason, yeah.
Ooh. I'm excited.
Yeah.
We're gonna. I know Sin and Chocolate is on the list. I won't tell anybody when because I've already spoiled. I think everybody already knew it was on the list. I don't think that was a spoiler in any way, shape, or form. But I'm excited too because I know that you really love this series, and so I'm excited to read the first one because I need to read the first one before I can read the second one. So that'll be a really fun conversation.
It's one of the things of just like, and we won't get into it. We'll get ready to transition, but. One of the things that I find that I can really appreciate when someone when a writer does something that is hard and they make it look easy.
Oof, yes.
Listen, I was like, ooh, come on and show out, why don't you? So it's one of those things where you're like, oh, I see what you're doing here. Okay, I see you. And I think it's very helpful, especially when you have a book that is connected that way or where it is a serial, because that's even harder, but you have the same sort of techniques in whether you're doing a trilogy or a duet so yeah, definitely. And I mean, and it's also good to see when people don't do so well, because then there's a comparison of like, okay, well, where, how can we bridge? Where's the bridge that we can build here? Yeah. So yeah. Awesome.
All right. Well, with that in mind, because it actually made a great segue, because it was like, man, Beverly Jenkins did it better. Why is that? And so having that exploration. So with that, let's start out with a summary of Indigo for everybody, and then we'll dive into getting the people ready for what are we going to talk about over the next 3 weeks.
Let's go ahead and do it. Indigo by Beverly Jenkins is a deeply emotional historical romance set in the pre-Civil War America, following Hester Wyatt, a formerly enslaved woman and Underground Railroad conductor, and Galen Vashon, a wealthy, enigmatic abolitionist. When Galen arrives wounded on Hester's doorstep, their forced proximity sparks a slow-burning, high-stakes romance rooted in mutual respect, trust, and shared purpose. Jenkins masterfully weaves suspense, cultural history, and tender intimacy into a love story that honors Black resilience and liberation. This novel is both a political and emotional journey where love becomes an act of healing and resistance.
Awesome. That summary tells us a whole lot about what we're going to experience in the book and some of the topics that we're going to be covering over the next few weeks. What are some things that, I had 4 different things that I wanted to say, and then they all train wrecked in my brain, and they all kind of fell out of my mouth at the same time. What kinds of writers, who should pick up this book? What kinds of stories and writers should consider sort of looking to this book for, for examples, for research, for study?
Ask the tough question first. I think point blank period, someone that just wants to read an amazing African American romance. It is really, really good, and it is unapologetically a Black book, right? In the best possible way without being exclusive. I would say also, if you are a person who is dealing with learning how to balance sensitive topics, this is pre-Civil War. This is during slavery. So it's a very just complicated, trying, emotional, traumatic period of time in our country. And the fact that Beverly Jenkins, she's a lady. She treats it, she handles it without sort of sugarcoating it or even watering it down, while at the same time it is very much a romance. So if you want to see that dance, even though I will say, which we talk about some, it is dated because this book was released in 96, but I still feel like she does it masterfully. I think another type of sort of adjacent to this is someone who has a sense of like a perspective that they really want to bring to their writing, whether it's historical or not. And we talk about this, or I don't hear people saying it as much as they used to, but the whole thing of like, write what you know. But there are people where you would like to bring your world into a fictitious setting or into a fictitious world. And we see Beverly Jenkins sort of flexing her muscle of being this person who loves Black history and who used to be a librarian, bringing that into the fictional world, but at the same time highlighting real world, real historical moments, even sometimes real historical people who shaped and molded our world and our country during this time. And I would say finally, I think this book just does an amazing job of being a romantic suspense, but it's not like when we talked about Dead Until Dark or even our next selection. I think she does a great job of making sure that the pivotal moments, that the suspense is there and that it's never far from our reach, because really the suspense is embedded in the circumstances and the time in the country, so you can't get away from it, right? Even when you're happy, it's only takes something to bring it back. But I think seeing that done and balancing those moments is it's almost like you forget. It's almost like you forget that this was they're on the Underground Railroad, right? But at the same time, you don't forget. And there are so many aspects of the story that really does help us culturally, whether you've never heard of it or not, or whether you've ever been curious, or even whether you've never really given it a whole lot of thought outside of having to read about it a little bit in school a long time ago, right? That she does it in a way that it is very entertaining without being traumatic and without being triggering. I think there's a couple of moments, of course, because she doesn't skirt around it. But I think without it being this constant, like, I'm a person where I'll be like, oh Lord, another slave movie, Mm-hmm. But there are some moments where it's just done in a way where you're like, oh, I'm glad I did do it. And I think this is one of those books where if you read the description, you may be like, I'm good. But I think if you say that about this book, you would miss an opportunity to read a book that I've probably read now probably several hundred times over 30 years. And I just love it. I just love this book. So, yeah, I know that was a long list.
No, that's great. We cover a lot of ground over the next several weeks.
Yes.
And I think that one of the big anchoring points of our discussion of this book when it comes to craft in particular is really getting us deeply attached to the characters and letting the characters be like the centerpiece, as in everything, the historical context and the conflicts that are happening in the story, all of it is reflected, like we experience it through the characters. So we are attached to the characters, and it gives so much, like, it gives a level of intimacy to the story, and a level of, like, that compulsion to want to know that they're going to be okay, and want to see them find love, and want to want to see them triumph, right? And so that we have kind of that vested interest in what they're experiencing, because we are invested in the individual. And then also experiencing, we'll say, the satellite individuals, which are the members of the community, and getting to see history reflected in individuals, so that we see, the different contributions and the different ways that that the community engages and experiences the setting and the conflicts within the story, and seeing that in a very human experience, right? Again, you have, and we talk about this a lot in the characters episode, but you've got someone like Foster, who is an important contribution to the intellectual side of the abolitionist movement, or to the an intellectual contributor to the abolitionist movement. But as a person, he constant.
It's like sometimes, yes, it's like sometimes it's like the lights are on but nobody's home.
Yes, exactly, right. But this is such, it brings so much specificity to the story, because and I think that's maybe a part of also the inclusivity of the story, of like, we all know that person,
yes,
right? And it's just like, man, your brain is a work of art, but God, like, sometimes you just I can't smack them upside the head, and I think that enables this story to expand, like, so to be all of the things that it is, because it's so anchored in humanity, right, and human experience.
Well, one of the things I will say that us doing this podcast has been very instrumental in, like, reaffirming or sort of double clicking on something that you already know, but now being very aware of it and always looking for it, which is understanding, like, what are the different angles and perspectives in which you can encounter this particular thing in this environment. In this case, can be this kind of person, right? I think it's easy to say that, okay, we're talking about slavery, depends on who you ask, because the Lord knows if you ask Kanye West, there's probably a whole bunch of stuff going on. However,
no.
But the point is, you would think that everyone would have a same or similar response. And what she does here is that's not true, right? And what we do is we're able to then, in fact, peel back the layers of something that seems like there's a collective either nod or shake to a thing, but we are able to explore the layers through the characters. And so we see this, that's the thing here, but it could also be, which is the opinion or the solution to this issue. We can also see it we see it in this very story about love. What is love? Hester's like, I don't want no parts.
Yeah.
Right? And Galen's like, listen, Petite, you gotta live life in any way you can, because you can't change the times. Or how fast it moves or goes away. But what we do is we see the experience of love from multiple perspectives, so that we get the layers of it, which allows us then to go deeper when they find that real love.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that I think she just does so well. It's something that you can even say, yeah, we could talk about a masterclass in romance, but a masterclass in character development, and how you can have a cast of characters that really provide a full experience.
Yeah.
And she just does that. She does that beautifully. So we see that, and we see it done well, really, really well.
Yeah, and I think this is something that's just kind of like occurring to me as we're talking through this. Is I think too, characters are your key to exploring complexity.
Exactly.
When you want to explore something, whether it is a problem or just simply like a phenomenon or a setting or an environment or whatever thing you want your story to explore, your characters are the key to doing that. And I think characters are how you actually achieve a rounded, again, complex exploration of whatever thing that you're looking at, because they are the lens through which you present different ways of, surviving or problem solving or not problem solving, or they are how you show the multifaceted. Complexity is like the only word that I can, it's the word I keep using because it's the only word I feel like that captures the fact that there are so many angles and perspectives and experiences and ways of looking at any given thing. And it's your key to really fleshing that out and actually having the opportunity for your story to explore these different things. But your characters are the avenue through which you do that and enable your reader both to understand and to care. They're the anchor of the human experience, because they are the humans, or humanoid if we're talking fantasy, or sentient creatures or whatever thing that we are connecting to, that are reflecting our experience as humans, our being human, right?
I would say understand, care, and challenge. I think one of those things, especially when you have this sort of story, right? Like that you're having this, she's sharing the things that are factual, but there are always going to be aspects of it that are in question, or you almost have to sort of like pick your side, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say that like in this story that it's sort of this political thing, but there are politics that are the undercurrent of everything that had to do with slavery, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not the treatment of it in the sense where we're putting this spotlight and we're just looking at it. And I think that's what you can perceive based upon the if you just read the blurb, or if you just knew that this is a historical African American romance set in the pre-Civil War in the United States. That's already going to tell you, I'm out, deuces. But what she does instead is she takes those aspects that could be a deterrent, and it's almost as if she infuses them into the environment, and she infuses them so that then it applies pressure to the characters. Yeah. It's like, and now if we were talking to her, she was like, okay, I did that. I could just hear her, but she did. Yes, she did. Yes, Miss Beverly. But it's almost like to apply pressure, and it brings up, and I'm sure I said it a couple of times in our recordings, something, and this is one of those other areas that I find us having these conversations just brings back over and over again about the use of your environment to sort of apply pressure and to find angles and avenues to increase the stakes and the conflict in the story, utilizing your environment. And here we have that environment in layers. We have the immediate environment in Whitaker. We have the environment of the community as far as the abolitionists and those that are in the Underground Railroad being affected by the Black Daniels attack. Then we had the community aspect. Once again, when you talk about the Black community, those that are in the North and those that are in the South that are affected by both the politics and the Underground Railroad, and even what happened to him getting injured. And then you have the country legislation, those who are aiming to fight. Like, so you have all these things, all of these layers that she's doing, yet at the core of this is a love story.
Yeah.
Look, what's that movie? I'm Just the Girl. What's that one with Julia Roberts who loves a man? Something.
Is that one Pretty Woman? Is that the one?
No, it's that one where she's the actress and he's the bookstore owner.
Oh, ooh, that's gonna require a Google.
Oh, Nottingham.
Wait, Notting Hill?
Notting Hill. Yes.
With Hugh Grant?
Yes. That one.
Notting Hill.
I knew it was one of them. And I just butchered the quote. But the point is, it also is, because the spotlight is on Hester and Galen, and their experience towards their happily ever after, but it's also their experience as Black Americans in this country at that time, and honestly, choosing love, right? Like choosing love. Like you can be about, it wasn't called Black Power then, but you could be about, working in the Underground Railroad, working with the abolitionist groups to be able to do things, her writing for papers, him going into the South and buying back slaves and bringing them back home. Like there can do all of those things. But at the root of it is like when he kept telling her, like, you got to live life.
Yeah. And
this is a celebration of living life while at the same time doing what you can to be able to support the cause without it being triggering, without it sensationalizing what was going on, and without skirting around the fact that this is what was going on. And if you find that you enjoy this book and you read any of her other historicals, you're going to come up against that. There are moments where you're just like, oh, but you can't look away. And I just feel like she walks that delicate line again with grace. She's a lady. She makes sure she gives it. And listen, these are some of my all-time favorite characters of all time because she brings it.
Yeah.
She brings it. And it's like, at the same time, if you strip away the time, I mean, granted, you wouldn't have the same story. It would just be like an enemies to lovers, opposites attract, grumpy sunshine romance, except for it's kind of not. It's got slave catchers in it. So, yeah. So it's a great story. So yeah. But she does. She brings that in with the characters. And then we don't give a lot of treatment to the side characters, but it's a part of that well-rounding, because a lot of those core themes that we experience, we do also see that sort of echoed in the secondary cast.
Yeah, and I think echo is a great word to use, because they just sort of very lightly reflect, because part of the story is about and because it's a romance, it's appropriately so that part of the story is about love and how we experience love and what love does to us, sometimes for better, and sometimes, I don't want to say for worse, but how love can wound us, right? I mean,
yes.
Hester's, the prologue, right, introduces her father who sold himself into slavery for the love of a woman, for the love of Hester's mother. And Hester, knowing that that's where what produced her, she looks at love and she's like, that's going to be a pass for me. That's going to be a hard pass. Versus Galen, who has his perspective of love is interesting because he has he ever had true love? No, but he has had a good old time, and he has made the best of whatever his life is, because he has this very embrace life for all that, wherever you can embrace it. And so he brings that contrast, right, to Hester. And so their approaches to love, he just, as he falls in love with Hester, he just wants to throw himself at her, right? He is like, take all my stuff, I want you to have pretty things and tasty things, and also I want to see you naked, girl. Like, okay, it's just everything in there. Versus Hester, who knows that she loves Galen, but is terrified of what love might produce, like in her, right? Like the effects of love, the consequences of love. And then in the in the side characters, we see just that very light touch of what love has done to them, for better or worse, right? What it has produced in their lives. And because we're so focused on Hester and Galen at the core, it's not a heavy treatment, but it is a light touch, but deeply relevant treatment that, again, shows how it can reinforce or undermine either perspective of love, which is kind of touches on that. We talk about this in characters where we see the wound reinforced within the events of the story, right? So it really kind of broadens that reach, but still it keeps us right on track with the center of the romance in the story.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things that we do talk about as well, and we talk about it, but I don't want to say we hammer on it. I think I tell Rachel, makes me want to select another historical romance so that we can have another discussion, which is sort of this thought behind the how to infuse or insert or share the historical aspects of your story, since in this context there's quite a bit. And Rachel, and I'm glad you brought it to my mind, because now when I read the other one, I will think about that more, which is, usually in historical fiction you see that, but you don't see it a lot in historical romance. And so I think that Beverly Jenkins does take a different approach. And I think that goes back to the alignment with her previous profession. That there's a big indicator of how she approaches it, but we do see that different. And I think that's probably one of those areas where we do get a sense of the times, because it does feel a little bit like info dumping, just a little bit, but it's almost like, because this is something that's not readily available, you're not going to see it in a whole bunch of other novels. It's not information that a lot of people will know. It's almost like you got to just like, am I going to do it? Yep, I'm going to do it. Is this the norm, or would most people say this is the right thing to do? Maybe, maybe not. I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. And so I feel like that's one of those things that we will see, because she does, honestly, just like open our eyes and our world, so that when we are watching their love story, we understand more like what is at stake. And even to the extent that Galen, being a man who is very wealthy and has access, that's beyond whether white or black man, still has a lot of sort of boundaries around him because of the cultural context in the country. And so I think she did that beautifully. So I think it's one of those things that we really get this opportunity to engage with those characters, the setting, the environment, while being very much a steamy romance, a slow burn steamy romance. And with all its trimmings of the time, right? The fact of like, she's not supposed to be untouched, and she's supposed to be, she's supposed to get married and have a sexless marriage, like all these different things. And so we see all the good, yummy tropes. And we don't talk about the tropes, but I will say this here. I think it is so interesting for us to pick up a book that is this old and to know these are the same tropes we just read a couple months ago in another book.
Yeah.
So when people be like, listen, hush up, grab a pen and a piece of paper, or grab your iPad or grab your computer and take some notes. Because these are almost these same tropes. Give or take, that we just saw in a couple of books ago. So it just shows you, which we had a long discussion this morning about the difference between niche and tropes and how to in DTW. But the point is, we see that, and I think that shows us how much it is a part of the experience for romance writers as well as romance readers.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, because you did say that the book is a little bit dated. I mean, it's 30 years old almost, and so I'm just kind of wondering, can you talk a little bit about how romance has changed from 1996 to 2025. I mean, obviously we can look at, you know, we read Lucy Score before, which is like 2021 or 22 or 2019. I don't know. It's somewhere in the last 5 years or so, 5 or 6 years, versus 1997, 1996. And, you know, because we've also, you know, we've had Dead Until Dark, which we were just talking about before the call started, that's 2001. And we see that shift into first person, but we still have a little bit less of that, very explicit language that we see in books in, like more modern romances where you know, when we get intimacy on the page, we often get very, like, more explicit language. So can you just like talk a little bit about some of those changes and what has sort of shifted in romance since then?
Oh, that is a hard question. Whenever people ask me this question, I like to back up a little bit and think about other forms of entertainment like television and music. If you think about the trajectory of the fact that now, y'all listen, I'm so going to date myself and Rachel may not even remember. Okay. I'm just playing. Look, she's like, wait a minute. I think that was a dig. Okay, let me tell you. Of like now, the fact that you do have cursing on regular television shows versus you never would have that. The fact that you have people having intimate acts or whatever, even if it's not all the way, on regular, normally like what you would call commercial standard television shows and channels, and all of that trickles down to other forms of entertainment, right? Even the fact that you had a time and season where there's explicit, you know, stickers and stuff that are now on our music and tags in our music. And so when you think about it in romance, it's essentially the same, right? And that before you had something that was steamy because it is intimacy on the page. It's not fade to black and it's not sweet, nor is it clean or wholesome. Which I hate when people talk about wholesome, but whatever, or clean. But so it is on the page, but the usage of the types of languaging changes, and it sort of updates, right? And how you reference anatomy and how explicit they are in those moments. But this is equally, if not more, steamy.
Yeah. I was amazed at how many steamy scenes we had on the page. I felt like every time I turned around, they were getting it, and I was like, oh, good for you. Go ahead, go get it. But you're right. Like it's, we have like just from the perspective of volume, right? Quantity of intimate scenes. There are a lot, and they are all on the page, except for the like where there'll be like one on the page, and then it was like, and that's what they were doing for the rest of the night, right? And then
not. And so I would say there's the language. I would say the number of times I will go towards how, you know, when you say on a scale from 1 to 5, right? That's the number of times kind of thing. I would also say that we can't overlook the fact of the sort of cultural norms and things of that nature. You know, I love that there's a line that Hester says in the story when Galen is like, well, you know, basically, you know, what if people know I'm living in the house? And she was like, you know what, like, you know, what about your reputation? Which becomes a part of this, right? Which is not, it's similar to other historical romance as far as, you know, the protection and or the blindsiding women. But in this case, she was like, you know, there's nothing that can do to me that slavery hasn't already done, right? And so we have that aspect, but there are both, you know, on page, the frequency, also the fact of you still have the things that we don't talk a lot about, but I think just in general, I love to talk about of like, what are the elements that causes that romantic relationship to progress? Because those things are in fact the same, right? Those things are minus, you know, text messages, but they had the good old, wire. They send wires.
They had wire and dudes who are going to run that message back and forth. It's surprisingly similar to text, except you have a human intermediary.
Exactly.
It's like getting your best friend to like take this
Pass
message over to.
Exactly. So you have that. I would also say that this is probably one of the ones that probably was on the steamier side, because if you really think about it, the first sort of steamy encounter between them was fairly early in the book.
Yeah.
Right. In structural past, a lot of times it was around the halfway mark. Mm-hmm. But I think because of the way that the plot goes of them being together and being separated and then coming back, and that probably played a lot into it, that you really sort of had to cement the core of that relationship, or the whisper of that relationship, before it becomes, it gets challenged. And then there are other aspects of it that lends to it, that increases and sort of complicates things, which makes it that much more sort of intimate, in that the differences between them societally, the class, of course, because he as a man has things that he has access to versus she as a woman. And I think all of these things sort of come to the page in a sense that at the end of the day, though, you still have a very strong woman who is strong in the ways in which society says she must be, but listen, this is the plight of all women now. She doesn't always have access to be able to be soft in the ways that she would like to be because of the times. And Galen is very much in support of, like, enjoying life, enjoying the softer moments, the quieter moments, because you don't know how often you'll have them. And so it's that dance of what I told you about a few episodes or a few books ago, where I absolutely love, like, in the beginning, there's like, this is not what I want. This is not what I want. This is not what I want. And we realize this is exactly what you need. There is a part that I love when Hester, looks at Galen and was like, do you really think I need more laughter in my life?
Yeah.
And he's like, yes, petite, and it's those moments where, like, love kind of shines a light, and them being in this place where, because of how they encounter each other, they build a trust and a bond, where even at one point she says, how do you know I'm not the traitor? He said, are you? She says, no. Then it's moot. There's no point of even talking about it, right?
Yeah.
And they build this relationship so that you see intimacy.
Yeah.
In so many ways, even before they fully consummate the relationship physically. And so this is one of the things that I feel like this book does so well. If you are a writer that you struggle with that, like, listen, y'all, I love a good chandelier swinging moment. Bring it on as soon as possible. But if you're one of the people where you're like, oh, I don't know. And it's like, you really can look at the progression of the intimate relationship in this story and really get an understanding of how we become to know without a shadow of a doubt that he's her person, even if she's fighting it. There is nothing about them that should be together. But the fact that he is out gallivanting across the country as the Black Daniel just tells you he could give two hoots about what people think he should do.
Yeah.
And when he decides he wants her, and here's the last part about this, like, if you really think about this as a romance reader, this is all the tropes right now that are popular. Possessive, obsessive, grump, alpha, a grumpy sunshine, opposites attract, fish out of water, billionaire. It just is a different scale. Billionaire.
He's the original billionaire.
Galen said when he went in there and dropped the money, the gold coins, was like, listen, don't play with me. So it just shows, like, when people sort of bark like this, everybody, that's how it's always been. And I always tell my students when they bark at stuff like that, I was like, it's not about the label. You have to ask what's underneath it. Why would that be desirable to readers to see that in the characters' sort of access? And here it becomes a thing that makes it so that it's almost like he can be a magician, but he actually still has limitations, just like when we talk about magic systems, right? Mm-hmm. There should always be limitations. There should always be the things that cannot be done, and there's reasons why, and all those kind of things. But the point is, and so you see that, and so for something that's 30 years old, and she does it well, and he does it well, and we love Hester, and we love him, and we see their limitations, and we see even the forced marriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Arranged marriage, or, marriage of convenience, contractual marriage that would have been. So you see all of that. All of that.
That's amazing that it's like all of the tropes that everyone is into. Like there's a timelessness to be cut for that very reason, right? Because you're talking about, why do people like this, right? Like, what is it that makes readers want this? And there's getting to the bottom of that. You get at some of those timeless things that we like, that create you wanting to be wanted, and craving security and safety, and all of these, for someone to be so in love with you that they will do anything in the right. All of those things you're getting at these universal desires, and wrapping them in tasty tropes, right?
Yes.
And that's this is like that, the proof in the pudding of like, these are the things that people crave. And we're just seeing them kind of packaged and repackaged because they do have some of that kind of universality to them.
And I would also say this is a great story for the flip side of that too. Like, I think it's easy for us to look at the tropes that causes a main male character to be desirable, and both desirable to the general reading population and desirable to the female main character and or not in the story. But also we see how Hester, who on the page, or if you were to sort of list characteristics and all of that, would seem to be not a match. But she's exactly the match. Because number one, he's not going to push her around. She may be small and she may not know whether her push is going to work, but she's going to give it a try. Yeah. She's going to give it a good hearty try, and he's going to be thoroughly entertained by that try. Yeah. And so you see that, and you also see a woman who sees the man beneath the grandness of him, which makes him want to do grand things all over again, right? Yeah. Which is like, oh. And so being able to look at it almost as if you were doing a character study of what that dynamic is, so you can understand. And I was recently talking with a client about creating female characters, and I find that if you are a person where you are in yourself, oh, I am woman, hear me roar, you will struggle with the female main character in romances. You will struggle with it because your mind says we all want to be this, that, and other. That's not what readers are looking for. So we got to give it to them. It's almost, again, hiding the spinach in the smoothie, right? We're going to give them that smoothie, but we're going to hide them vegetables in there. And so you have to learn how to do that. And this is a great example of that, of a woman who in all other ways could kind of be silenced. She's dark skinned. She's an ex-slave. Her physical limbs, her hands and her feet, evidence the fact that she was a slave. She's poor or economically challenged. And even in those moments, she doesn't let Galen push her around, and she doesn't let herself be manipulated when she thinks you are, right? So she's a very quintessential strong Black woman, but at the same time in the course of this story, and she was raised by a strong Black woman, he helps her to see where you can be strong and you can be soft, and neither one compromises the other.
Yeah.
And it's such a good thing to see. And this is somewhere where Miss Beverly just shines. It doesn't matter whether it's contemporary, whether it is historical, whether it is her just contemporary fiction, or whether it's her romances. She just does this well in balancing that with the experience of Black protagonists. And so I would say this would be a great showing of that, which we don't get into all of that, but I would say if you were like, should you read this story if you don't know already? Yes, go get it.
That's perfect. We didn't get a chance to touch on like the romantic suspense and like suspense sort of being secondary. We talked about it in terms of like the context, a little bit in like the history, but I just wanted to give you the chance. Is there anything you kind of want to give people like a quick taste of, or a quick, like, if this is something you're trying to do, anything you want to say about romantic suspense in particular, with regard to this story, before we wrap the episode, or any literal other comments that you want to make?
Well, I'm not going to go too much longer. I would say, yes, this does have a suspense here. I think one of the interesting things about suspense in this story is that the suspense is really attributed to the circumstances and the environment. And you will hear us say several times that it's sort of like parroting what we've said in previous episodes of like using the environment and allowing that to up the stakes and to cause things to be more complicated for the characters. And that's what we see in this story, because what causes that the suspense plot line to take off is kicked off from the very beginning, almost page 1. And so we will see that, but I do feel like it's an interesting dance of where it's all of the major moments in the story have that suspense element intertwined in it, but in the immediate moments, you don't always realize it, but it's there. And I think it's this really great, delicate dance that she's doing of keeping it there. But I think it's a lot. We essentially experience it in the adjacent aspects of it, right? Of the slave catchers coming around and poking around, of people talking about, what is going on, etc., hiding the Black Daniel's identity, etc., investigating, if you will, how his attack happened and took place. And so we do have that aspect. But again, I think with everything else, it feels so masterfully done because it's underneath, if you will, it's the undercurrent of the romance. And at no time do we forget that this is a romance.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I would say about it. It's really, I just love it.
Yeah, I'll just kind of add on to that briefly. I think that this is one of those things that's really important when you're writing anything, literally anything, knowing like what is this at its core, so that you, number one, I think, it's even from a marketing perspective, so you can frame it in such a way that the people who are going to want to read this will read this. But also, and that's something really that I learned from you in, the way that you market romance, particularly like, modern romance. But, so this story knows at its heart, it is a romance, and there's not a second that you are unaware of that. And there's not a second where you get confused about the plot of what this is supposed to be about. Even though, again, she so well integrates it so that you never lose, you never lose the suspense because of the context in which the story takes place. So when you're writing something, so I think about, if you're writing a mystery romance, or if you're writing a romantic suspense, or if you're writing, I think about Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, where, at its heart, it's so much a crime story, and you never lose that thread. So knowing what you are writing at its core, so that you always stay connected to that core plot thread, or that core thing that you are, whatever that thing is that you're writing, that you stay connected to it, and then everything else wraps around it. And so it might come strongly to the fore or shift slightly to the background. Those things are always there. They're always present, but you're never losing sight of what the story is primarily about. And that's really important for, any kind of genre mashing, subplots, historical, fantasy, like all of those things, like that's, stay on track with what that core is and stay connected to it. Don't lose track of that in your scenes and as you're writing the story.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, and I don't think we mentioned this, and this is probably the last thing that I have to add, I think, is I when I first read the story, I did not guess who was behind. So listen, baby, it's a whodunit, because you do not know. And she hid that baby. And when you go back and read it again the next time, you said, "This, I knew she was bad," but she. All people used to say she bad to the bone, right? she a bad one, you know, and you don't guess it. And I think that's when you have those moments, it just takes it up a notch because she didn't have to do it. It was already a strong story.
Yeah.
The person that do it, you're like, oh no, right? And who doesn't love a good talking to the book moment? You know, it's it's all of that. And I feel like I think it's evidence of someone who really cared about the story and really thought about the story deeply. I think it also is evidence of someone who loves reading.
Yeah.
Because it's a little bit of everything. And it just reminds me, listen, Sean Coyne talking about, you know, the true masterworks are a little bit of everything. And this is. It really is a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think it's a great, and when you get to the end and you still get what I love, a collective sigh and a happily ever after. Oh, so I love it.
Perfect. What a perfect little just way to wrap up our preview, because we have loads and loads to talk about. We spent an hour talking about it today, but we have got another 3 hours of discussion, and as always ahead for you guys, parceled out over the course of 1 week in between. So nobody panic. They're like, dear God, the next one is 3 hours. No.
Clutching pearls.
But and again, all that time, it is pretty well. It's spoiler free and still didn't hit everything that we can talk about. So I do highly recommend, as always, reading the book in advance of listening to the episodes. But even if you don't, or even if you're still in the middle of reading, we do avoid we avoid spoilers, and you can get a lot out of every time just hearing about books, hearing about craft. All of those things are going to benefit you. So we hope that you will join us for the next 3 weeks as we deep dive into this book by Indigo by Beverly Jenkins. And I think that's it for the day, right, Dana? We good?
I think we are.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you everyone so much for listening. Thank you for watching or whether you watch or you listen, thank you for doing so. Join us for the next 3 weeks. We'll be back next week to talk about the plot of Indigo. And until then, don't forget to subscribe, come visit us at storydeepdive.com. Leave us a comment if you have questions about stuff, and rate us. Hit the little alert bell. All the buttons. There's so many of them. Press the ones except the thumbs down. That's what I say. Press all the buttons except the thumbs down.
All the good ones.
All the good ones. Press all the good buttons. And we will see you back here next week. And until then, as always, happy writing.
Bye.